Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Garrity. I'm the chairman of the board of the Robert Kennedy Children's Action Corps. Thanks for tuning in this evening. Tonight would have been our annual Embracing a Legacy celebration, where we honor those individuals who have embraced the legacy of Bobby Kennedy by improving the lives of children. Like many events affected by COVID-19, we had to postpone our event to a future date. So we are coming together tonight in a very different way. We are fortunate to have our actor friends, Jack Maxwell, and advisory council member, Charles Shaughnessy, as well as our new friend, Dan Lauria, here with us tonight. So sit back and relax as they share their thoughts about kids, careers, and quarantine. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to our host, Jack Maxwell.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, my name is Jack Maxwell, and I'm the host for this live event for and in conjunction with the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. So what is that? What is the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps anyway? Well, they're a leader in child welfare and juvenile justice. They operate a number of services and programs for at-risk youth and their families. They came together in 1969, the year after we lost Bobby Kennedy, because they believed, as he did, that every person deserves respect and dignity, and we must honor their individuality, and that every child, regardless of their social or cultural or ethnic background, has the right to grow up in a safe and nurturing environment. If I were to guess, I'd say one of the things he was most proud of was being a dad. He and Ethel Kennedy had 11 children together. Speaking of dads, we have with us as our guests today two of the most beloved dads in television history. Our first guest played a guy that we all know, Jack Arnold. You know him, the often gruff, sometimes cuddly, but always understanding patriarch of the Arnold family, and dad to Kevin, of course, the central figure and narrator in that wonderful series, The Wonder Years. Here he is, Jack Arnold, Mr. Dan. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Hiya, Jack. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And on the flip side of that proverbial coin, we have a great dad as well, but he was more upscale. Multi-millionaire widower. He hired somebody to help out with the kids, and that person happened to be a nanny. And so he had to deal with her, let's say, very challenging, very crazy, very wonderful fashion sense and style, her frenetic, wonderful energy, and her, let's say, interesting nasal tones. Of course, that was the nanny, played by the great Fran Drescher. Here he is, Maxwell Sheffield himself, Charles Shaughnessy. Hi, Charlie.
Hi there, Jack. Great to be here. Hi, Dan. Nice to see you.
Hey, Charles. Good to see you again, man.
Thank you both for coming in. Really appreciate it. So,
I love the introduction, by the way, Jack.
Yeah, you good at that, huh?
Oh, something like off the top of my head.
It was almost over, but it was very good.
Oh, thanks. A little bit what? Over the top, you said? Or longer than yours?
No, over, long.
Oh, a little bit long. Oh, we have an hour, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, let's start with Charlie, because Charlie, I know you're a dad.
He's the leading man. That's why you start with Charlie.
Oh, okay. Hey, I'm just the host. What do I know?
Yeah.
Anyway, Charlie, I know that you have, I guess for the last dozen years or so, you have worked with the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. And, you know, you're both wonderful actors. You've been doing it for a long time. And this pandemic has hit all of us, certainly hit the entertainment industry. I don't know anyone who's not affected. But even more so, I got to believe underprivileged youth must be really at risk here. Huh, Charlie?
Well, yeah, it's a great point, Jack. It's something that a lot of people haven't realized. You know, speaking for myself, you know, I live in a pretty nice house. I have a nice backyard. There's sort of no stress in having to worry about chasing jobs or what am I missing out there. So this hasn't been an altogether terrible experience for me. But you have to think of some kids and youth who come from very different circumstances and are really behind the 8 ball in either dysfunctional families for one reason or another, abuse or drug addiction in the home, or maybe abandoned parents who just sort of have abandoned their kids. And so they're left very much vulnerable in these times. They're stuck in a home that might be a dangerous place, and certainly not a nurturing place. So for them, this is extremely tense and a very worrying time. And the RFK, the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps, have been very involved in making sure that these kids are okay and checking in on them and on the youth in their programs. So they do terrific work all the time. But right now, it's even more important to keep these kids in mind and make sure that, as you say, they have a shot to pursue the dreams that all the rest of us can pursue. If you start life behind the 8 ball on the sort of fuzzy end of the stick, it can be very difficult to pursue those dreams. So what the organization does is to give them nurturing and encouragement and partnership to help them find those pathways instead of sliding down into incarceration and, down the wrong path.
That's why it's such a wonderful cause.
Yeah, the people are terrific. The people in the organization are fantastic. I felt so privileged to meet them, and then especially to meet some of these kids. Over the years I've been working with them, I've come to know some of these kids, young people, and they're amazing people. You see it in their eyes. All they want is a chance. You give them half a chance, they're going to turn their lives around, and they have. I've met many examples. There are many alumni who've turned their lives around and are hugely successful, contributing members of society. They just want that opportunity to show their potential. So yeah, it's an amazing organization.
And we'll get more into that in a little while. By the way, you can ask Dan or Charlie anything you want to, as you know how this works on social media here in quarantine. We're not live, but you could just go around on the computer, ask them questions, and we'll try to get to them. I believe Father's Day is what, like a month away, something like that? Might even be a month.
I think it's exactly a month.
Exactly a month. Well, so there you go. So let's talk about your roles as TV dads. Dan, one of the things I always heard, whether I was in Hollywood or even before that child stars grow up screwed up. Because once you're a star in Hollywood, you don't have a grasp of reality or what it's like.
No, that's
great exception on your show, right? All of the kids grew up really well, didn't they?
I think it's an exception throughout the business. I think, like any other business, 15% of the young people who get fame too soon have a hard time, but 85% do well. And our show, Fred Savage is directing every other hour show and half-hour show on television. Josh Saviano is a big investment broker, and Danica McKellar, who I'm probably closer to than anyone else, she has her 5th math book coming out. So, that's not true. But, I do a lecture at college, and when questions like this come up, I say, our business is like any other business. 15% of the people I work with are total asses, and 85% are great people. They're just great, wonderful people. The only difference in our business, we promote the 15%. We don't promote the 85%.
Well, I had to bring it up because that myth is so prevalent. I've heard it, you've heard it, Charlie's heard it. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because I know you worked with some great kids both then and now they're wonderful adults. Right.
And I'd like to comment a little bit on what Charlie was saying. I do a lot of work with Big Brother, and I'm on my 5th little brother, who's my godson, but I haven't seen him in 5 weeks. I see him on the internet, and we FaceTime, but normally we would, every day I'd pick him up after school. Well, there's no school, and I worry about him. He's stuck at home. Luckily, he has a computer and he can talk to his friends online, but some of these kids like my first 2 little brothers, they were inner city Washington, D.C. Back then. They wouldn't have had a way to communicate if this hit back then. So it's very important what the Robert Kennedy Foundation is doing.
Speaking of TV dads, I know that, like I said before, 2 of the most famous dads in television history. But that was a while ago now. And of course, I think that portrayals of television dads have changed quite a bit over the years. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the portrayal of families has changed, quite a bit over the years, which is, a good thing. It's like people are, as in society, we're, expanding idea of what makes a nuclear family. So it's being represented on TV. So it sort of reflects the progress that's being made in society. It does change as you look back at some of the older TV dad series, Leave It to Beaver. And it's an America that doesn't exist anymore, and people look back at it with a certain nostalgia, but beneath the surface it wasn't always quite as cheery and lighthearted as it came across in those series.
Which begs the question: was America really like that, or was it just television? What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, no,
I doubt if America was ever quite like that, and I think the reason why The Wonder Years was a hit was we were probably a little more realistic than most shows,
right?
And I always loved the shows that ended with the narrator who was supposed to be Fred Olsen.
Oh, it looks like we might be losing Dan. Might be freezing up a bit. Dan, all right, let's go to Charlie. Charlie, playing the father. Yeah. Playing the father to these children, unless we get Dan back here.
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. Okay, your picture's a little frozen, and the trials and tribulations of doing something live today on the internet, right? You back, Dan? You with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I hear you fine.
Last thing we heard, you talking about the narrator, played by Daniel Stern, of course. You wanted to say something about that?
No, a lot of the shows ended with the narrator saying, "If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done that."
Right.
How would you say that?
It's a lesson show.
So as far as we have a question. Oh, by the way, you send in your questions and we'll get to them when we do. But we're so lucky to have both of these guys with us. So we want to get to your questions as soon as we can. From Julie Menendez, this is for Charles. I call you Charlie. Do you prefer Charles?
I was always Charles when I was in trouble. If I heard Charles George Patrick, I knew it was time to hide. So I feel more relaxed with Charlie.
All right, Charles, what do you prefer, doing theater or TV series / movies? Julie Menendez. Thank you, Julie.
Boy, Julie, that's a great question. I really would hate to miss out on any of the three. It's like they kind of complement each other. It's like if you just ate ice cream all year round, and nothing else, you'd kind of get sick of it. You kind of want to balance it with, a little bit of protein, a little bit of vegetable. And it's like a rounded meal as an actor is to do a little bit of TV, a little theater, a little movies. The sort of spiritual home is the theater. That's where I'm most comfortable and enjoy myself most, to actually take a part, rehearse it for a few weeks, and then run it all through every night. Unfortunately, the economics of live theater it's hard to make a living at it if you can't supplement it with the occasional TV show. So that's the ideal life. And I've been very lucky and very fortunate. I've been able to do a little bit of everything. So yeah, I wouldn't like to choose any one of them as ahead of the others.
Charlie, in that scenario, which one is the ice cream? Is it theater, television?
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? Steak, ice cream, and French fries. So take your pick. They're all equally delicious. I couldn't do without either of them.
How about you, Dan? How would you answer that question?
Well, I would rather do theater than anything else, because once the curtain goes up, nobody yells cut. Nobody can mess with your performance. But like Charles says, they complement each other. Without doing television, I wouldn't sell as many tickets in the theater. So, and plus, TV and movies, they pay a lot better than the theater. So we need all three. But if I could only do one, I would do the theater. And I only do new plays. I don't do any plays written by old dead white guys.
That's one of my first memories of you. I was doing a play in Hollywood, and I was telling you about it, and you said, "I'll come if it's not by an old dead white guy." And it wasn't. It was a new play, so you were kind enough to come.
I wonder, talking about plays, I wonder if this pandemic, when it finally ends, we're going to see an explosion of new works, because all these writers have been stuck for a few months without anything to do but work on their writing. So I'm wondering if when we come out of this, there's going to be an explosion of material, maybe some really exciting new works coming out of it.
Yeah, I think there will be, Charles, because I know two very, very successful television writers that have caught up for the series they're writing on. And they email me, I'm finally writing that play you've been bugging me to write.
Right.
So they've had the time. So you may be right. We may see some good work coming out of this.
I think in times like this, there's always, as you say, Charlie, an explosion of creativity. Back in just in my lifetime alone, the Vietnam War, the music of the 60s, all of that. And of course, I know, Dan, you served in the Marines. You'll always be a Marine, of course.
Marine.
And then, whenever we went through anything, I mean, you had the thing at Fort Dead in Ohio when Nick Nazar got to Kent State. And it's always been a reflection. Art has always been a reflection of what's going on in society. And it comes from pain. It comes from situations like this. I think there's going to be wonderful plays and movies. I hope they won't all be about zombies in the pandemic and post-apocalyptic, but I'm sure there won't be, because you're giving artists time and some motivation, and good stuff comes from it. I've learned that.
We've all had a chance to reflect on other stuff. What's been wonderful about it, and is obviously, we don't need to go into the tragedies that have come out of this, but the silver linings is that the world has kind of stopped. The merry-go-round has stopped. And so we've all had a chance to reflect on other people. I mean, I've been talking to people that I should have been talking to a lot more than I have been, but now I'm getting in touch with them. I'm thinking about where my priorities lie, what's important to me, about, how it is for other people. So there's a lot of time to ponder and find new material to write about too in this, things that hopefully will set the world on a slightly better course when we come out of it.
I just said that the other day. I was doing another live event, and I was talking about an old Twilight Zone episode with Burgess Meredith, and he has time now to read all these books, breaks his glasses. Yeah, and I said it's called Time Enough at Last, I guess, in the episode. Yeah. I said that's the silver lining for me in this whole thing, because there's so much bad about it, so much suffering. But the thing is, like you said, priorities now and time to do the now we see if time was just an excuse or not. Right.
As long as you don't step on your glasses, on your reading glasses, like Burgess Meredith.
That's exactly right. Let's get back to the cause for a second, and then we'll get to some more questions. Do either of you have any? I know you're barely old enough to remember, as I am. I was an infant, of course. But what are your memories of RFK in the moment back in the day?
Oh, I still remember the speech the night he was shot. I was in New York, and it was televised, and we all thought I thought he's going to be the next president. And then 20 minutes later, it comes over the TV that he was shot. But I really thought he was captured. He was the person who captured the time. I did a play about Bobby Kennedy. I played Hoffa, of course. And, he was a guy who he didn't want the challenge, but once it was thrust upon him, he was tackling it. He knew he was the voice of the country at the time. So it was devastating when he was shot. But I still remember that night.
I know the play you're talking about, The Good Bobby by Brian Lee Franklin. And,
good play.
And that's right, the play. And you were great as Hoffa. Ambassador Hotel, June 5th, 1968, shortly after midnight, he gets shot and passes away the next day. And I remember the hubbub, even as an infant, all around that. And I remember them showing his picture on the TV. It's one of my earliest memories. What about you, Charlie? I know you grew up in England, but of course, everyone there loved the Kennedys, or at least most people.
We loved the Kennedys, but I really didn't know. I mean, I knew about Jack just sort of in terms of the sort of glamour, but nothing concrete. And I knew even less about Bobby Kennedy, other than that he was a Kennedy. He was he's one of the good guys. And in England, we just kind of shook our heads and went, what are these crazy people doing, shooting all their best people? So it was a different take on things because I was so removed. It's almost like the Vietnam War. We saw it sort of second, third hand, but it was not personal. But when I came here and became an American, actually became a citizen, then I sort of steeped myself in the sort of history and culture and the American mythology of the Kennedys and politics back through the 60s. So yeah, a tragic loss.
I'm from Boston, and my grandmother had a rug, or whatever you call it, on the wall of John F. Kennedy behind the in the Oval Office behind the desk. They just were crazy about the Kennedys.
Yeah.
I remember, Dan, you'll remember this since you saw that speech live. Now on to Chicago, and let's win.
Yeah,
this,
right. We thought he was, when they talk about these assassination attempts, you think of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and when Reagan was shot. But with Bobby Kennedy, the one that is similar for me was when John Lennon was shot. It was like the culture was shot, not a political figure, but the culture itself was assassinated. So that's how I looked at it.
Right.
He just represented hope for us. From what I hear, again, I was just an infant, but it was such a tragic loss on the heels of Martin Luther King a couple of months before that, and then of course his brother Jack. November.
It was like the end of the 60s. 68 was this extraordinary pivotal year, and then 69 just sort of drew the curtain down on what was really the hope of the 60s. It was this devastating blow after blow after blow of the kind of dreams and aspirations and visions that were born out of the 60s and the youth movement, and we're going to change things. And then bang, 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 bang. All those heroes were taken out. And it was a devastating time.
Yeah, the Summer of Love, as you say, 68, and then 69, Altamont. But 69 was also the beginnings of the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. So imagine, since then, they've been doing it since then. And how many kids have been helped
rising out of the ashes. That's the thing, is that when these things knock us down, things like this grow up out of the ashes. You get these extraordinarily powerful forces, and the Children's Action Corps is one of those. Is his legacy that grew out of the ashes of the 60s at the very end of that decade, and has been working ever since.
And by the way, I'll tell you more about that at the end, and how maybe you can be a part of it if you'd like to. Anyone who would like that. But let's get back to questions, because they have so many questions for you. Dan, they said Pitch was one of their favorite shows, and they want to know if there's going to be more episodes of that.
Well, they keep talking about bringing it back. We should have never been canceled. So that, it's hard to get the people together again. And Dan Fogelman, who created it, Rick Springer, they're working. This Is Us. I mean, he created This Is Us. And it's hard. It's hard to get the people back. People are working, but we'll see. Maybe that'll be a thing this pandemic may be the Phoenix. This arises back. We needed a show with a woman breaking through the glass ceiling, and sports was a good way to do it.
And that was on Fox, and she was the first Major League Baseball pitcher, if I'm correct.
Kylie, she was great. She's great to work with. And Dan Fogelman can write. Is he a good writer?
Well, look at the success of This Is Us, by the way, speaking of these people you just named. And they also want to know that they say you've been, Shane Fackrell says, you've been a special guest on so many shows, and I think this is a hard question to answer, of course. What's been your favorite guest role?
The next one.
Spoken like a
good
true
answer.
Actor.
Yeah. No, you don't. It'd be harder for me to answer what show I didn't enjoy doing. 90% of the shows where our guest star was just a lot of fun. I mean, you mentioned Pitch. I was a regular. But on Shameless, working with William H., that was just a couple of years. All I did was laugh, and I was lucky when I came to LA. One of the first gigs I got was Cagney and Lacey, and working with Sharon and Tyne. Tyne's still one of my best friends. I loved working with her. And they didn't edit, Charlie. Every time I had a scene, it was always the last scene of the day. And I was going, boy, I'm so glad they called me back, but why am I always last? And Tyne said, you idiot, because they know they can shoot us in one. So if they're falling behind, it's like, shoot it in one, let's go home.
Right.
We did.
Right. It's always a compliment to be last up. They know that you can deliver.
Yeah. Yeah. So
but it's interesting that you say you had a good time as guest. I mean, for me, it's always been, either it's been a fabulous time because you're sort of embraced into part of the gang, and the stories you're threaded into the story.
Right.
But sometimes when you have a very successful show, it's been on an ensemble show for a long time, and you come on as a guest, you're really there to sort of set up the regulars. The audience tunes in to see the regular family, the regular people, and to see them do their stuff. And I know there's some, from the Nanny, we'd have some of these unbelievable guest stars who by the time editing had finished and, we'd actually got the final version, they came in, did one line and thank you very much.
Yeah.
Which is sad because I always feel like if you're going to have a guest, give them a platform to show what they can do.
When I was doing Sullivan and Son and you came on, I mean, between you and Christine Eversole, it was like you guys had worked together forever.
That was fun.
Yeah. That was like robbing a bank. I mean, I'm working with 4 stand-ups and I'm getting paid for it.
Right.
I sit at the bar with Brian Doyle Murray, and we were like the 2 critics in the Muppets.
Right, you were. That's exactly what you were. Yeah.
That'll be in the show.
Hysterical.
So that was fun.
Speaking of editing, Dan, you said it earlier about the joy of being on the stage. And by the way, not a lot of you who are seeing this would have had the opportunity, I believe, just because the numbers say so, of seeing either one of these 2 gentlemen on stage. I saw Dan in a play called Lombardi about the great Green Bay Packer coach. And you should have seen the reviews he got. One guy said, he is not an actor playing Lombardi. He actually becomes Lombardi.
Well, I had a lot of help, Jack. The NFL was great. And of course, I had a great supporting cast. And I had Judith Light. You work with Judith, the bar goes up and you got to meet that challenge. She's the best.
Yeah, but you still carried it on your shoulders. And I'm also lucky to see Charlie on stage. He did Spam a lot, of course. 42nd Street, I've seen him in. I've seen him in Christmas Carol. And it's a joy. What I'm trying to say to you out there, you might love people on television and from movies, but go to live theater if you can. If you haven't been there, it's one of the greatest joys, especially seeing someone that you know from television and film, but just there's nothing like it. The actors are saying that. And if you haven't been or haven't been enough, try it again when everything comes back, because they're certainly going to need your business.
Yeah, we're going to have to do something.
Charlie, we have a question for you. Brian, are you still trying to beat Andrew Lloyd Webber and make show?
Well, I have to say,
I don't even know what that means.
Well, Maxwell had a great bit of what's the word? Is it Schadenfreude?
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude. When the movie of Cats came out and Cats was castigated, Maxwell was dancing in the streets. He's always had this thing about Andrew Lloyd Webber. He's never understood Andrew Lloyd Webber's success, especially doing a musical about singing cats. It's never really something he's been able to digest. So I, through Maxwell, or Maxwell through me, got a certain amount of satisfaction that Andrew Lloyd Webber was once again talked about, but not in a particularly glowing way. As Charles Shaughnessy, don't get me wrong, I love some of his work, so it's not me. But Maxwell was always, you mentioned Andrew Lloyd Webber and Maxwell will go into a complete hissy fit.
It's a great bit, though. The writers.
It was a fun bit. It was a great little running.
They call that a fallback.
Which I don't think
to go.
we tried to get him. I don't think he ever came on, but we tried to get him on.
I'm going to ask this question because I know we're going to get it, and it's for both of you. We'll start with Dan, I guess. What is that one moment in your life where the spark just turned on inside you and burned so brightly you said, I know I have to be an actor. I'm not going to do anything else the rest of my life?
Well, I don't know about one moment, but I had an aunt who lived with us for a while, my Aunt Adele, and I'd come home from baseball practice or football practice, and she'd say, go to bed early. And I'd go to bed, and in the middle of the night, she'd wake me up and go, James Cagney, or, Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart. And we'd watch the Late Late Show or the Late 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 Show. And she knew all, and I knew then I loved old movies. But when I was at college, and this is a true story, I was in spring football, and I was telling a joke before practice, and a little old lady came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder pads with her cane and said, would you like to be in a play? And I said, I always wanted to do that. And she said, I know. And I said, how would you know? And she said, because I'm the greatest acting teacher in the world. and she was Constance Welsh. She's the one who started the Yale Dramat. And I knew as soon as she said, "Do you want to do it?" I knew that was what I wanted to do before I ever went to my first rehearsal.
Wow. What was she doing at football practice? What was she doing
at football? She was looking for a big, ugly guy to play Caliban in The Tempest. That's what she was. I remember my first rehearsal with her. I studied all my lines. I knew the very first rehearsal, I go out there and I'm whipping it. I'm giving it everything I got. And she walked down the aisle and she said, "Mr. Lauria, Shakespeare did not grow up in Brooklyn. I suggest you."
And that was the start of it all. What about you, Charlie?
I got my first inkling when I was about 5, I think 4. I used to love reading in class. You know, when you're learning to read and the teacher says, "Does anyone to read out loud?" and everyone dives under their desk. I was always the guy with my hand up, me. So I used to read out loud. And then one year they decided to do Peter Rabbit as a play. And I just assumed I was going to be Peter Rabbit. So I started learning the lines and I discovered that I wasn't. I was the third bluebird from the left. And my friend, Peter Robinson, was Peter Rabbit. And I remember these two emotions. I remember being so disappointed and so angry that I never wanted to speak to my best friend ever again. But at the same time, I was aware a little voice inside my head was saying, "Well, this is interesting. You're really upset about this. Yeah. This is much more important to you than you ever realized." And that was my first inkling that this is what I wanted to do. And then the next year, I think I was the magician in The Magician's Nephew, and there was no stopping me then. You know, I was only accepting leads from that moment on.
Charlie, I'm thinking you probably never had this question ever in your life. So I'm going to spring it on you, and I hope it's okay because we're friends. Can you give us a little third bluebird from the left? What was that?
Oh, yeah, I can, actually. This is what it was, and this is how I did it. Tweet, tweet, look out, Peter. Tweet, tweet, look out, Peter. Tweet, tweet, look out, Peter.
Well, see, the dry humor, the dry delivery worked.
I was so miserable. I was like, I'm not even going to give it anything. But I did have this spectacular costume. My mom, to cheer me up, sewed, she stayed up night and day sewing this beautiful blue velvet bluebird costume with a sort of yellow satin breast. So I looked great, but I was a miserable bluebird.
I know this is about dads, but thank God for moms, huh?
Yeah.
You know that performance that you just gave reminds me of Gene Wilder and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Willy Wonka, right?
Yeah.
It's his. He's saying, "Oh no, please don't."
Oh no, please don't. That's right. Yeah, I remember. What was her name? Veruca.
Veruca Salt. Right, exactly. Hey, someone said, I just saw a question. Rachel Feldman says, "Charles, can you please give us a Miss Fine shout out?"
Miss Fine. But then now you have to do the.
Fran Drescher will punch me in the face next time I see it. I might do that. What about you, Dan? You've done so much. When people come up to you, what do you hear the most about? Or do they ask you about a certain movie or a television series or what?
No, when I'm in New York, most of them yell out, "Hey, coach, how's it going?" Because of Lombardi. But most of the country, people will walk up to me and go, "Work's work."
Yeah,
that was Jack Arnold classic line. Work's work.
Jack Arnold, Wonder Years. Boy, you both had the opportunity, and you were wonderful in it. Well deserved to be on two iconic shows.
Let me tell you something about dads on TV. They had on Father's Day. This was about 10 years ago. They asked, "What dad on TV would you most like to be your dad?" And there were a bunch of them on there, and I wasn't on the list. Charlie, you were in the top 5.
I don't know.
A couple of years later, they asked what dad on TV was most like the dad you had, and I was number 1. So everybody had it.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that, right? At least they recognize you. The Wonder Years ran from 88 to 93, and Charlie, 93 to 99, I believe. Was the Nanny. What about with you? When they come up, I want to say something first before I ask you that question. I was with Charlie and Scott. I'm in Phoenix. Speaking of the Phoenix rising from the ashes, I was with Phoenix, with Charlie here in Scottsdale, Phoenix, right on the borderline. We were out to breakfast. He was doing a play here, and all these people ran up to him. Shane, it's Shane Donovan, Days of Our Lives. I can't believe all these years, decades later, they still love you as Shane Donovan. What was it about that that's so memorable? And do you ever get sick of hearing that?
No, well, once a soap fan, always a soap fan. It's the most devoted fan base, I think, that's out there. The soap fans, they call them their stories. And yeah, it always amazed me, not just the passion that they believed in these characters, but the fact, to this day, I haven't been Shane for 30 years. It's amazed they can recognize me. I mean, I was a kid, but yeah, it goes to this day, and the show's still very popular. Some of the people I work with are there still. And it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. I really enjoyed doing them. They were, they kept you on your toes. You had to work very fast. It was the absolute opposite of working on a stage show where you have like a long time to build a character. This is like bang out of the box.
And it was also a great place to get used to all the equipment. I mean, I never did with a microphone waving by me.
Right.
I mean, you really had to focus and to deliver some of that dialogue.
Right, you had exactly, and to make pretty dodgy dialogue that their bless their hearts having to write it as they're going almost, and to make it work, and to just get a fistful of changes, and I digest them in 10 minutes and do it.
Right.
And that happens on TV. I'm sure I don't know about with you, Dan, on a one camera, but on a 4 camera, definitely. And I know this would have happened in the Sullivan and Son, where on a 4 camera, the writers, if a joke isn't working or a moment isn't working, or they don't like something, they'll just come in with 2 or 3 pages and say, "Here, do this," and you have to just do it.
Yeah, we do one line at a time. That's why you and I like to go to the theater, because once the curtain goes up, at least
they can't touch you.
But talk about soaps. When every once in a while somebody will come up, I'll hear, "Hey, Gus." And I was Gus the Killer Pimp for 2 years on one night. And believe me, the people who say Gus, they're not the same people who come up to you, Charlie. They usually offer me drugs or something. But I was Judith Light's pimp for 2 years.
That's funny.
Yeah, and that's when they asked me in Lombardi, who would you want us to see for Maria Lombardi? Literally, Judith was the first name I put down. So I put down Judith and Wendy Malick. I said they both would be right. Wendy was working. Judith came in an audition. She got it like that. So
what a wonderful experience. Back to the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps for a second here. I know as a child growing up with just a mother, no father, growing up in the projects, it was challenging. And if it wasn't for certain adults putting me back on the right path with a kind word or some encouragement, my life would have been different. What about for you two? Were there any adults in your life, other than family members, of course, who take on that role or should? Anyone that you remember that said, "God, thank God I had that person in my life"?
Well, for me, it was my aunt who got me in old movies, and Miss Welsh and Dr. Cecil Hinkle, who my master's is in playwriting. So between those three, they really, and of course, I had a couple of good coaches. And when I was overseas, my captain, who became 4-star General Carlton Fulford, he was the finest man I ever knew. We didn't agree on politics, but he was the guy you wanted at your side. So I had a lot of good influences in my life.
Yeah.
Lucky, And
I had influences
people in the world. We go on these talk shows and they talk about the past, and I hear such horror stories that some of my fellow actors went through. Then they get to me, and I got to be the most boring guy there, because my parents were the 2 nicest people I ever knew. I didn't even know we were poor till I got to college. I didn't know you got more than one gift for Christmas. I thought that was it, And so I was lucky, Jack. I have a charity for single moms, the Open Door, in Nashua, New Hampshire, with my friend Odie, and we work with single moms. So I know what you went through growing up. I can't identify exactly with what you do, but I know what those moms go through. So it's tough. But I was lucky.
What about you, Charlie?
Yeah, I have to echo Dan. I was incredibly lucky. I mean, I would feel extremely guilty about it, except that I try to, I don't take my good fortune for granted and try to, give back where I can. But I was incredibly fortunate. I had two great parents, a very happy household. I went to terrific schools, influenced by some wonderful teachers that came into my life and people that came into my life and through my life. It's just been a kind of joyride. So I feel very fortunate, and as such, I can from that position of good fortune do what I can to help spread some cheer, especially with these kids who start so far behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that, by the way.
Sorry?
I'd like to say I feel the same way. Even though I had those circumstances, I feel very fortunate. I had a wonderful mother and a grandmother who was a saint. And if not for them, they saved my life. So even though I had different circumstances, I still feel very fortunate.
Right.
That's so nice to be a part of this, because growing up in Boston, never able to be a part of I was of the right age, but somehow I never got connected with the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps. But it's so important, because I know there's going to be people generations from now who are going to talk about as a child, they or their family members were helped out by the course.
And it's like, you think of what the wasted potential, some of these kids, it's a cliche to say the leaders of tomorrow, but the great minds and great contributors to society who just because of no fault of their own go down a path of tragedy and start on that slippery slope to incarceration and recidivism, and there's no real getting out of that once you've been in it for a certain amount of time. And so what this organization does, it intervenes at that moment and gives these kids a chance through nurturing and support and programs to turn their lives around and then contribute to society. And some of these, I met them, some of these incredible people are going to grow up as leaders and contributing not just what they can to society, but just on a basic economic. This is the thing I always go back to, is it costs a fortune to keep someone in prison. If you put someone in prison at 12 as a juvenile, and they then spend their lives in and out of incarceration, it costs the taxpayer literally hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million by the time for that life. Whereas if they're in society and doing work and paying taxes, they're contributing to it. So even on a basic economic, take the morality, take the humanity out of it, and just go basic economics, it makes no sense not to support an organization that can go in and intervene and turn these kids' lives around and help them to become contributing members of society. It just works on so many levels.
It's beyond me why they would rather build prisons than schools.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and Robert Kennedy, he epitomizes they give Lincoln credit for saying it first. It is the slogan for Big Brother is no man stands so tall as when he stoops to help a child. Yeah. And I think Robert Kennedy epitomizes that.
Right.
And I think this whole organization is a way of reaching down to pull a child up,
Robert F. Kennedy said this as well, as far as I understand. Each generation makes its own accounting to its children, so the generations go on. Every generation must do that. If you skip one, then you have all these kids, as you say, Charlie, who end up in prison, or Dan, as you say, instead of having schools, we have prisons, and then it's just logarithmic from there, of course.
Right.
That's why RFK believed that every child was important, everyone.
I always felt that was a great argument when they said we should have free education, even through college. I said, wow, look at the money we'll save on prisons if we do that.
Sure.
It kind of pays for itself.
Right. And the taxes that they're going to pay, they're going to have jobs. They're going to pay taxes. They're actually, we're going to make money out of it. It's just, it makes no sense to me. But
no, we're starting to get on a political thing. I can feel that.
Let's get
back to Father's Day.
I want to ask you questions. But Charlie, you have children of your own, a couple of wonderful daughters, and you played a father on the show. Did one help the other at all? Did you learn anything in real life that helped you on the show, or anything on the show that helped you in real life? or they're just two separate things?
You know, it's funny because there were certain overlaps. You know, when I was playing Maxwell, my dad kept floating through my head. I had a wonderful, very close family, just the four of us, my brother, myself, my mom, and my dad. But my dad was a writer. So half of his existence was living in his head, you know. And so sometimes when he was busy at work and dealing with a knotty writing problem, he'd wander into the bosom of the family, into the kitchen, with sort of chaos going on around him, and stand there looking like, and they said this in one of the episodes, looking like a stunned beast. And I thought that's an image I want to keep in Maxwell. So that Maxwell, with all Fran Fine and the kids and Niles and Cece, there are moments when he's just like a stunned beast going, and he sort of takes it in and then turns around and leaves because it's just a universe he doesn't understand. So I found a lot of similarities between the two of us. And yes, I was having young kids at that time. So it was kind of fun to switch from Maxwell's rather, oh my God, what's that? Rather sort of inept fathering to what I hope was my own better fathering. And that's today is my, Susan and my anniversary. That's been popped in there.
That woman deserves a medal.
She does. She does. She's stuck with me for 37 years. Can you believe it?
We couldn't surprise you with the cake, so we just wanted to surprise you with that.
That's so sweet. And you know, thence come my two gorgeous daughters. So, you know, I as I say, I've been so blessed. I feel very fortunate.
Did you know early on you were going to end up marrying Fran Drescher's character?
You know, you always on any show where there's kind of sexual chemistry and sexual tension, you don't want to get married because once that happens, the air gets let out of the balloon. So we were always hoping that we could kick it down the road as long as possible. But then eventually you're running out of reasons to not get married, and the audience is getting so frustrated. And more importantly, the head of the network was getting very frustrated. So they had to, like, you know, go down the aisle, and the air absolutely got let out of the series, really.
We're getting a lot of questions like this, so I'll try to form it into one. Any future for you and Fran Drescher? There's a lot of talk about reboots, or they read the pilot recently. You read the pilot recently.
Right.
So how do you feel about a future?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm not one of the creatives in that. And Fran's been playing around with the idea of doing a show on Broadway, a musical, which I think would be as good an idea as any, to do a musical of the pilot, basically based on the pilot of the show. I don't know about a reboot. I don't see how you can go back to she'd have to be the granny, not the nanny. And I don't know. And we were married and we have our own kids. So I don't know how it would work. But, you know, if someone wants to write something smart and witty and clever and offer me the job, I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to say no.
Hey, I got to tell you, the idea of Charlie and Fran being grandparents, I think could be very funny.
I think
you're advising your grandchild one way, and she's advising the grandchild another way, and their parents don't know what the hell you two are doing.
I mean, it could be done. Call it the granny, and it could be the same sort of dynamic. So you never know. Listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'll take anyone's phone call.
Oh, jeez! In case you're offended.
All I know is when you come in on the pilot, she should be in an elegant dress, and you should have khakis and a work shirt.
There you go.
Marriage is done to her.
Yeah, there you go.
You're going to set the tone of the show.
Both did a 180, but you're such lovable people and characters. I could see something like that coming back and working. Dan, Jack Arnold, who is he modeled for? Did you get someone from your life and say, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or is it you? Is it you? Are you that guy?
No, I mean, I grew up blue collar, and that was my dad and my friend's dad. They were rather quiet. They worked very hard. They loved their family, but they didn't want any hassles from you. I mean, the respect was giving them peace. Just give me peace and I'll be happy, you know? And that's how I looked at Jack Arnold. And we had great writers. I mean, Neil and Carol, who created the show, Neil Marlins, Carol Black. And the real star of the show, and Fred Savage will agree with me, was Bob Brush, our head writer. So the original creators left after 18 episodes, and Bob Brush was the head writer, and we did 130. So for 112 shows, he was the real star. We were shocked we were canceled. We were 27 out of 166 shows, and we were canceled.
Did you ever hear why? Was there anything going around?
You don't want to get into that here.
Okay. All right.
Let's
not get into that then. Yeah. Let's not do that. But
it was a wonderful show. I loved it. Susan and I absolutely loved it. In fact, Susan was writing a long time ago. She had a writing partner, and they wrote a very good spec script for the Wonder Years and sent it in. And actually went in to meet with the writers there.
With Bob, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, they wrote this really, really interesting, really fun script about a teacher at the school who was caught up in the blacklist and the McCarthy stuff. And so, yeah, we loved it. Absolutely loved it.
If we had come back for even 12 more episodes, they were going to do one I wrote, Charlie.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, about Fred coming, him and his mom come to pick me up at a veterans meeting, American Legion Hall. Mm-hmm. And he hears me, the guys are going fishing. And I say jokingly, well, if I didn't have that ball and chain, I'd go with you, but I can't, guys. That doesn't want to talk to me, And since I never said I love you, the show ends with the wife figures it out. And she said, you got to go talk to him. He thinks you don't care. And it ends with me walking in and go, I thought you knew me. And he goes, right. What are you talking about? And I said, well, if you know me, if I wanted to leave, I would have left. And then I walk out. And Fred, you hear the narrator go, I think he said he loves me. Yeah, he said it. I think he said
That's so cute. That's so sad. It wasn't.
That was as close as I could get.
I've seen this question quite a bit because I know that people don't have the luxury of being on set and watching this. But how much, if any, improv, and either one of you, so we'll start with you, Charlie, was there anything, I know that writers come in and will change if a joke is bombing or not working the way it's supposed to, but are you allowed to play around a little bit, especially once you get your character down?
I have to, first of all, apologize. I had to move my background, because I was in the back, near the backyard, and it's got very noisy back there. Suddenly the gardeners are mowing. So I've had to move. Forgive me. Writers are very nervous about actors improv, unless it's an improvisational show, unless you're working with Chris Guest or any of those people, or Second City show, something like that. Otherwise, improv is great in rehearsal. It's fantastic to sort of find moments, but once you're shooting, it can cause a lot of issues, because you've got to cue shots. If you've got 4 camera, you've got to go from one shot to the other, and suddenly the line is different. They don't know when to call the cut and things like that. So there was really no improv on the Nanny. As I say, you often do in rehearsal, if you have the luxury of rehearsing a play, for instance, or a movie, and there's a difficult scene, difficult piece of character to get into, you might improv a little. But I don't think it's used as much as it looks like. Sometimes people will write things to look like they're improv, but it's pretty carefully written.
Right.
What about you, Dan?
No, we, especially for us theater people, we kind of do what's written, and doing rehearsal, I'll share an idea with a writer. I'll say, hey, you're missing a joke here, or we could do something here. But I'll tell you one thing I've always done. Charles Durning taught me this. I will say everything as written. And as soon as I say the last word, if they don't yell cut, I'm on my own. So I always have a one-liner after everything I've learned. And I tell you, a lot of them have stayed in the script. So if they don't yell cut, that's my time. That's my time, right, Charlie? If they don't yell cut.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I don't want to stand there with egg on my face.
And they'll often do that. I think that, if you have a reputation for that, they will keep rolling, because, that can be where the gold is. They'll let you go and wait for, lightning to strike. So, yeah. That's a smart director. It's a smart producer that lets someone like yourself do that.
I was lucky enough to do post work on a movie called Mystic River, and I met a guy, John Doman, and we were in a UPS commercial together, and he was actually in the movie. And he said, as you guys know, Clint Eastwood doesn't say action or cut, and he got that because when he played Rowdy Gaines back in the day, it would scare the horses because people would yell cut, action. So he just says, come along, and then he lets you keep going at the end after your line, like you just said, Dan. And what you come up with, maybe it's gold, maybe it's trash, but at least he allows it, right?
Yeah, I hated when they changed it to feature actor instead of supporting actor, because I always felt we were there in support. And a lot of times when they don't yell cut, what I'll do is walk past the star so it ends up with a close-up of his face. And everybody said, oh, that's so generous. I say, no, I'm here to support. And your look could make this scene more than any dialogue. So, but you have, I think Eastwood counts on people to do, it's not just a word, it's maybe movement, if you know what you're doing, towards the camera lens, so he can have that close up on the star, you know. So I the older you get, the more you pick up these little tricks. But I was lucky, you know. Charles Durning was my mentor since the first day I went to New York City, you know. So I learned all those little tricks.
Lucky man. Charlie's giving us a tour of his house.
I'm sorry, back again. I was contending with a washing machine. That's
okay. Charlie, this one's for you because you work so closely with the organization. Tracy Schoolcraft wants to know if the Robert F. Kennedy Children's Action Corps is throughout the U.S. or just in one area.
It's in Massachusetts. It's in the northeast of the United States. So it's really out of Boston and that area of Massachusetts. Is where it sort of does its work. You know, I think there are other organizations that do similar work across the states, and it would be wonderful one day to sort of see if they can link up and one can have a kind of concerted program. But that's, you know, it's extremely difficult because you're dealing with state budgets and state and politics and all that kind of stuff.
A lot of egos.
I'm a little out of my depth here. You probably have to talk to someone in the organization, but I think that it's more difficult than it sounds to sort of expand beyond Massachusetts.
And there was a comment from Christina that said, both you guys are awesome, by the way. I just wanted to say that as well.
We fooled her, Charlie.
What?
We fooled her.
We fooled her.
Dan, I have to say, I mean, earlier, and it's really touching, you got emotional talking about Big Brothers and your godson. What was inside you that said, I really want to give back to children? I mean, Charlie does it with the Children's Action Corps. You do it on this level. You don't have to do that. You're in television and films and successful. You don't have to do that. Why do you?
Well, you know, I'd like to give you a real humanitarian answer, but the truth was, when I was in the Marine Corps and I got back from overseas, I was sent to the basic school where new young officers teaching human relationships, which is, you can't believe how hard that was in the Marine Corps, because the last thing these colonels and generals wanted was a first lieutenant telling them about human relations. And I'm serious, his name was Colonel Schultz, who ordered me to...
I know nothing.
I know nothing. Well, he was a very smart guy. And he said, I'm going to make general and you're going to help me. I want a program that gets the Marine Corps involved with the civilian community. And I don't care what the rules are, because we weren't supposed to. You know, it was Vietnam War. They didn't want Marines walking around the city. And that night, Sergeant Jackson, my sergeant, he said to me, I just saw a commercial for Big Brother. Maybe we can get little brothers to come out to the base and Marines will be their big brother. And if they get transferred or go to another station, their responsibility will be to get another Marine to take their place. So we literally went 1972 riots and everything. We went in the middle of Washington, D.C. in our dress uniforms, which you weren't supposed to wear. And we went to Big Brother And we ended up getting the entire Marine base, and then a Navy base, and then the Army base. We got over 14,000 Big Brothers.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's why I was the National Big Brother of the Year, 1972. So I'm on my 5th little brother.
That's a great story. That's fantastic.
You think of the impact you had and the organization since then. That's so wonderful.
Well, once I got to tell you the truth. They lie. They tell you when you get a little brother, you only have to see him 2 hours every 2 weeks. You're not supposed to spend any money on them because they go back to an environment with it. Forget it. They ain't once you get that kid in your life, you're there every other day. They sleep over. I mean, my first little brother, I went from picking him up, and last year he retired as a grip. And he asked me, how you doing? You need any money? You're all right? Go the whole gamut. They're part of your life. And, it's like this organization, Robert Kennedy. If you can help one of these kids, believe me, it stays with you the rest of your life. And you'll feel you owe them. They don't owe you. You'll owe them,
Charlie, how did you get involved with this a dozen years ago?
I worked when I was on days. I worked with an actor called Tom Rosa, who was on the show. And he was working at the time. He then called me out of the blue a few years after that. And he was doing some work with the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, Children's Action Corps, and just said, would you be interested in coming out to Boston and doing something fun with the kids, maybe doing some sort of workshop? Well, I didn't know what this was about. I didn't even know what at risk meant. But I went out and said, yes, I'm always up for helping kids. If there's anything I can do, I'm there. So I went out, we did a really fun workshop. I met the kids, I met the people in the organization. I was blown away by both. It was a pretty successful event. We decided to do it the following year and then the year after that. And I just fell in love with the kids themselves and the people that run this organization. And to work with these young adults and these children who can be pretty young, they light up when you just take notice of them. You just call them by their name and you say something encouraging and they just light up, because that doesn't happen. You realize how important language is, and something that we take for granted. Just saying, hey, good job. Good job, Brian. And Brian just kind of explodes because people don't say that to him. So it knocked me sideways. And I've been trying to do what I can since. I've been going back once a year. This year, obviously, this is why we're doing this, as the Embracing the Legacy was going to happen as a big sort of event and fundraiser for them, and they couldn't do. So Tom and I came up with this idea of maybe doing something like this, and Jack, and Dan, you both very sweetly agreed to come on. And Jack, thank you for doing what you've been doing. And it's, as you've got to know them yourselves, and you'll know what sort of an organization it is and how worthwhile it is.
So important what you just said, Charlie. As Lyle Kessler wrote in the wonderful play Orphans, just a little encouragement, Treat, just a little encouragement, Sometimes that's all anybody needs.
Right.
I can't believe we've done over an hour. So thank you so much, Dan Lauria and Charlie Shaughnessy. I'm proud to call both of you my friends. You're just such guys. Thank you so much.
Love you, Jack. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having us on.
37 years.
By the way, there's a website right here. If you've seen anything or heard anything tonight that interests you, that inspires you, this website right here, you can go there to learn more. And maybe as the RFK, Children Actions Corps, as they've changed lives, maybe you can too. Maybe you can be a part of it. And it's all right there. Thank you so much for joining us. And stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.